Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first ever Fantasy Griddle podcast. I'm your host, Mike P-tash. Alongside me is my co-host, Duncan Murphy. Check us out on fantasygriddle.com for fantasy analysis, rankings, and more. Follow us on Twitter at Fantasy Griddle. Duncan, what do you have to say for yourself?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. I'm very happy that we're doing this. We've been talking about doing a podcast for a long time, and the time has finally come. So here we are. Just to give you guys an idea of what we have in store for you, we're going to break down positions over the next few weeks and throughout the preseason. Today, we're going to talk about quarterbacks. We're going to go through the ADP and kind of break down which guys we like, who we don't like, any kind of sleepers, that sort of thing. This is the first show, so we'll have to play it by ear, but yeah, just excited to be here.
All right, so I have the ADPs in front of me, and I've got a few things I'd like to say about each quarterback on there, and we'll kind of go back and forth here based on order of their ADP. First guy up I have is Aaron Rodgers, 26th overall. I love him as the quarterback one this year. He was the best quarterback in fantasy football in 2016. When healthy, he was the best quarterback in 2017. He did have that clavicle injury that knocked him out. He adds Jimmy Graham as a red zone threat. He's got a top 10 offensive line with the number one pass protecting left tackle. If healthy, he will be the QB1. I think it's a little bit of a reach having him at the beginning of round 3, but if you love the player, you got to take him. If you don't, I think he's going to be the first quarterback off the board. So if you want him, go get him.
So we're going to disagree right off the bat there. I don't know what it is about Aaron Rodgers this year. I just can't get behind him. And part of it is the ADP. I just feel like Green Bay is on the downside. He's lost Jordy Nelson, who he's depended on for years, and I think that was a really important piece for him. He does get Jimmy Graham, but he's never really used the tight end like other quarterbacks do, like Andrew Luck or somebody. But, I mean, Graham is a great player, and he's got Devontae Adams there, who's also, I think he's going to be a number one receiver this year. But I'm actually moving him down my ranks a little bit. I think I've got him at number 5. I got him at 4 right now.
The next guy up is a surprising player to have as the second overall quarterback. Someone that a lot of people are very excited about this year. I think is a huge reach at the number 2 quarterback spot at 39th overall. Deshaun Watson. I really like Deshaun Watson, but not as the second overall quarterback. He had insane chemistry with both Hopkins and Fuller. He elevates the players around him. What stuck out for me was the game in Foxborough when he played against the Patriots. Going toe-to-toe with Brady. Patriots have to score with 23 seconds left. And every game after that, Watson went on to throw at least 3 touchdown passes in every single game until he tore his ACL. If he's healthy, he's going to be a top 5 quarterback, but I don't see him returning, that kind of value for the second overall quarterback. He also plays behind the 32nd ranked offensive line, which is a huge red flag, especially for someone coming off an injury. So I don't love him as the second overall quarterback, but I do like him in general if he's there in kind of the mid rounds.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I do think that he is a bit of a reach at the number 2 overall quarterback. I had him on my team last year, and he was amazing. And I really love him as a player, and I think he's a great person as well. But his efficiency numbers last year were just like ridiculous. Like he threw his touchdown rate last year was over 9%. And to put that in perspective, the greatest season ever recorded by as far as touchdown percentage was 9.7%, and he had 9.3. So he's the highest ever touchdown rate of any quarterback in NFL history last year. So that's just not going to happen again,
Yeah, absolutely. And you just touched on the guy that we have as the third overall quarterback on Fantasy Pros ADP rankings, and that is Tom Brady. These next couple of guys we're going to talk about are much better value, I feel like. I think we know what Tom Brady is. I think we'll know that, no matter what happens throughout the course of the season, he's going to be in that top 2, 3, 4 quarterback. So he's a relatively safe pick. And where he's going, in the beginning of the 5th round, I think that's much better value than either of the other first 2 guys. Brady, he led the NFL in pass attempts last season. He's no signs of slowing down. Um, 8 touchdowns to 0 interceptions in the playoffs last year. He's got 3 returning starters on that offensive line, and I think Julian Edelman coming back this season, he has the 4-game suspension, but I think he is an invaluable weapon to Tom Brady, and it's really going to pay dividends this season.
I mean, I love Brady, and I agree. I had no idea he had the most pass attempts last year. That's crazy. How many do you have, off the top of your head?
I can find out. I did not.
Well, that's okay. I agree. He's a rock solid QB1, and in the 5th round, like when you get into the 5th round, you're choosing from guys that are not proven players. So if you can get somebody like Tom Brady in the 5th round and lock in 25 points a game, that's great value.
Tom Brady, 581 pass attempts last season, led the NFL.
Wow, surprising. They did draft Sony Michel, though, so maybe they're going to move to more of a ground game this year. What do you think?
I mean, he could kind of carve out that Dion Lewis role, catch a lot of balls out of the backfield. I don't think the passing volume will be any different than it's been in years past. Tom loves to throw. They love to let Tom throw, and I think he's going to continue to do that. While he still has the arm, I don't see any reason why they would, cut back on the volume they have. They've added, obviously, Decker, who's going to be learning the system right now. They have Kenny Britt, who has a year under his belt with the team at this point. So I think he's going to air it out plenty this season. I'm not worried about them.
You think Britt's going to make the team?
I don't know. It depends what their other guys can give them. He certainly has the experience.
I actually like Dorsett.
Yeah. I mean, he was obviously, highly touted coming out of college and was a high pick for the Colts. Hasn't really seemed to put it all together yet, but was brand new to the team when he got, traded for Jacoby Brissett. So, I think a lot of things will become clear in the preseason. If Britt is playing with the first offense, obviously the chances of him making the team are great. If he's playing in, the 4th quarter of the 3rd preseason game, then probably not going to see him. And as we go on here, we'll have more and more information. But I think Kenny Britt could be, a solid producer. But once Edelman's back, I think he's definitely going to take a back seat, no matter who's, playing in those first.
Yeah, I agree. I think his better days are behind him. He had that one crazy year in Tennessee, but I just don't see it from him. But just to put the ADP thing into perspective for Brady, I mean, you can have Brady in the 5th, and the guys going around him are Brandon Cooks, Golden Tate, Alshon Jeffrey, Sony Michel, Greg Olsen. So, I mean, those are good players, but you're talking about the best quarterback of all time and probably the best quarterback in the league right now. I mean, some people think Rodgers is, but if you can get that guy, it's tough to pass him up there in the 5th round.
Yeah, for sure. And another guy who's going to be tough to pass up in the 5th round is Russell Wilson. He's got an ADP of 48 right now. And speaking of the best quarterback in football, you're looking at your QB1 here from last year in Russell Wilson. The one thing we know about Russell Wilson is he is going to play every game. He's super durable, never gets hurt. If he does, he plays through it. He's the QB1 from 2017 with 34 touchdowns and nearly 4,000 yards while rushing for another 600 on the ground. I think they're a better overall offense this year with a healthy Chris Carson and the addition of Rashad Penny. They don't have Eddie Lacy and Thomas Rawls clogging up that offense anymore and slowing them down. The offensive line is still bad, still a bottom 3 offensive line, but Russell always seems to make it work. They did add Brandon Marshall, and I don't really know what he has left in the tank at this point. He did nothing with the Giants last season, so I'm not expecting much. But Russell's done more with less, so we can see if he has any kind of impact. But like I said, he started every game since he's been drafted. Durability is not an issue. Between his stats last year and him being a lock to play all 16 games, I think he's a definite top 3 quarterback and could be, interchangeable with Rodgers and Brady.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I actually have him as my number 1 overall quarterback. And in the last 3 years, he's been a top 3 quarterback for 3 of the past 4 years. So if you get a guy there who's got that kind of consistency, to add him to your roster is a nice piece. And some people don't take into account strength of schedule that much this early in the year, but personally I do. And he has the second easiest schedule for all QBs this year, which is a nice add that into the mix. The defense, they've lost Richard Sherman, Cam Chancellor retired, Michael Bennett's gone, Earl Thomas is currently holding out. He should be, I think he's stuck there, so he'll be back. But they're going to be playing from behind a lot this year, so I think he could have a career high in attempts. He also obviously runs the ball, so he's got a safe floor, and he's got that huge ceiling that he can give you these massive games. So he's probably going to give you 500 plus yards on the ground and at least 2 to 3 scores. Lost Jimmy Graham, but that could actually be a good thing for him, because if he's got, he threw 10 touchdowns to Graham in the red zone last year. Take away Graham, maybe he decides to run a few more of those touchdowns in, and that's 6 points a score. So I could easily see him being number 1 overall.
All right, so looking at the Fantasy Pros ADP for the 5th ranked quarterback, we have Carson Wentz. I actually think this is kind of right where he belongs. We're talking about a guy who was legitimate MVP candidate before his injury last season. Had an insane touchdown rate. I don't expect him to be as efficient as he was last year, but he's obviously coming off, with a team that just won the Super Bowl, just beat the Patriots. I don't really know what the Nick Foles situation is in Philadelphia, but it's definitely Carson Wentz's job. He's been drafted to lead this team into the future. He's behind the number 1 ranked offensive line. I think Nelson Aguilar and Zach Ertz took huge steps forward last year, and Alshon Jeffrey played very well. He's coming off a shoulder injury, so that's definitely a concern, but this guy just played so well and elevated his game so much last season. I have him as my 4th ranked quarterback. We're splitting hairs between him and Deshaun Watson, I feel like, but I definitely have him solidified as a top 5 quarterback. I have no reason to think he won't be.
No concerns about the injury then?
No, not at all. ACL tears are, everyone tears their ACL now. He's going to be fine.
Personally, I don't know. December, that gives him what? I guess he's 9 months. He's right on the brink. So I've actually knocked him way down my rankings. I might move him up. You were pretty convincing there, but I have a feeling he's going to miss the first 2 weeks of the season. At this point, he's still not participating fully in 11-on-11 drills. He, like you said, he's the face of the franchise. He's the future of the franchise. They've got Nick Foles there, who's the Super Bowl MVP. And a guy like him, there isn't going to be a controversy. He knows that it's Wentz's job. So if Wentz isn't 100%, why are they going to rush him out and put him out there if he's not ready to play? So I've knocked him way down the ranks. I have him at 14 because I think he's going to miss a couple games. I also think it's going to limit him. Like he got a lot of points last year on the ground, and a guy coming off an ACL tear, even if it is a new, the new age where everyone's getting an ACL tear and they're fine, but I feel like he's due for a little bit of regression. I think he's going to have less on the ground, and I think he's going to miss a couple games.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely possible that he could miss a game or two. We'll have to see if he can get in any work in the preseason. Who knows if they'll even want to risk him in the preseason. I know you've wanted to talk about this a lot more. Even if he does miss a game or two, I would be very comfortable with having him and starting week 3 and just figuring out week 1 and 2. There's bound to be a good streamer to those first 2 weeks. And I'd be fine with stashing him for the first 2 weeks and just kind of figuring out what to do those first 2 weeks. Because I think, if he falls late enough, then he's going to, at some point, be a great value.
I hear you. I fear that I could, be waiting on him and somebody snags him, and then you're right, he's like an MVP candidate. But quarterback is so deep this year. Like, you've got guys that are throwing 4,000 plus yards like left and right. So personally, to spend a 5th round pick on a guy coming off an ACL tear who's probably going to miss a couple of games potentially, I'm not risking it.
Fair. Next guy we have is Cam Newton. I think everyone probably has Cam Newton somewhere in their second tier of quarterbacks. He's been a top 5 quarterback in 5 of the last 7 seasons. And what I love about Cam Newton is he's basically their goal line back. He gets 5 rushing touchdowns every single season, and last year he also rushed for 750 yards. I don't love the weapons. I think Funchess proved that he's not a legitimate first wide receiver. And I just don't think he has. Greg Olson's great. Christian McCaffrey is going to be, a great weapon out of the backfield, but I don't think he has the receivers to really push him into the top passers. But between that and the rushing yards and the rushing touchdowns, I have him firmly as my number 6 quarterback, right before Drew Brees. And I owned Brees last year. He's very frustrating to own. I'd much rather have Cam Newton heading into this year.
Okay. We've got a lot of, it's funny because we usually agree on a lot of things, but our quarterback rankings are way off. And I have him as my number 2 quarterback. And the reason I've got him so high is the rushing totals, where he's going to give you 700-800 yards on the ground and probably 6+ touchdowns. So he's got a really, really high floor. He has produced as a top 5 quarterback going on 6 or 7 years. Like, he's reliable and he's going to give you points. They did add DJ Moore. Don't forget about him. And he was Mike Mayock's number 1 overall wide receiver in this year's draft class. So more of a possession receiver, but I think that he could be a huge weapon for him. Christian McCaffrey, again, is going to get probably 90+ catches and do what he does. So every catch that he catches off the, in the flats, those are points going to Cam. So I'm all on board for Cam. He was the number 1 overall quarterback back in 2015, and I could easily see that happening again. He's also got a pretty good strength of schedule, if I'm not mistaken. 11th overall.
The next guy I want to talk about is someone who I owned last year and was maddening to own, but I think there's a lot of positive regression coming for Drew Brees this season. Last year led the league in completion percentage and QB rating, but the touchdowns dropped off a ton. So aside from last season, he's thrown for 32+ touchdowns in every season since 2008. He had 23 last season. That was his lowest total since 2003 when he was a Charger. So that's definitely going to go up. Cameron Meredith has joined this team, and before he got hurt, he was doing some very impressive things with the Chicago Bears. He's a former quarterback. I feel like former quarterbacks that transition to wide receiver have a huge leg up on the competition, and if Cameron Meredith can come into camp and learn this offense and be healthy, I think he could be a huge contributor to Drew Brees. He's a big body in the red zone. I think he'll outperform anything Willie Snead did last year. I really like Drew Brees. He's going to fall in value compared to years past, and I think he's going to be a great value. They have him going 65th overall. I am looking to get back on the Drew Brees train this season after a pretty disappointing 2017.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I have him ranked as my number 6 quarterback. What do they have him at 7? Fantasy Pros has him ranked as 7. So yeah, I have him at 6. His last 4 years, he was the 9th quarterback, the 3rd quarterback, the 6th and 6th. So he's consistently right around that area. And Meredith is a nice piece to add. He's also got Kamara, like Cam Newton. He's going to have that little satellite back there collecting all those yards that Kamara is going to pick up. So Brees, I saw something on him too the other day about how they asked him if it was going to be his last year and how he was playing. His answer was funny. He said he wants to have more fun, playing football. And last year was like the most fun he ever had, and he had a great year. And the touchdown totals weren't there, which is a kind of a fluky statistic. So I think he's going to have a great year, and he's going to be right around there in the top 5.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The next guy we have, and I think this guy's kind of getting into the back end of the 2nd tier, beginning of the 3rd tier quarterbacks. There's probably a bunch of guys that you can consider around this quarterback selection, but it's Kirk Cousins in Minnesota. A couple notes on him. Obviously, he's got the 2 great receiving options in Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen. He's got the great red zone target in Kyle Rudolph. Dalvin Cook is back. He was hurt, early on last season, but was setting the world on fire before that. When you look at those weapons, you have to like that. Offensive line is a little bit of a concern. They're the 28th ranked offense. but they're playing their home games on turf. It's a fast track. I think Cousins is easily, a top 10 option. They have him 8th at Fantasy Pros. But you have to, any quarterback connected to Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen, you have to think is going to put up numbers.
Yeah, you're right on point there. I've got him, I think, a little low on my list here. I've got him at 12, and that's just because I think I like some of the guys ahead of him that I just think are also going to surprise, like Derek Carr and Jared Goff. But you're right. He's a good quarterback. He's playing on a great team. They're obviously going to put up points. Minnesota's got a new offensive coordinator this year in John DeFilippo, former quarterbacks coach for the Eagles. And so he's been helping Carson Wentz and Nick Foles. Now he's going to work with Kirk Cousins. So I think he's going to bring a lot to the table, and Cousins is going to put up the yards. He's got the receivers. He's got a great tight end, great back. So you can't go wrong with Cousins. And he's a guy who he might even slip a little bit for you, and you could get a top 10 quarterback fairly late.
Absolutely. And we've gone through our top 8 quarterbacks at this point. Let's take a step back, and then we're going to come back here with our next 8 quarterbacks, rounding out the top 16. And we're going to get into next a guy that I'm very fond of in Jimmy Garoppolo.
Jimmy Garoppolo. My name is Jimmy Garoppolo. And I've waited all my life for this. Does anyone know where my helmet is?
Okay, welcome back to the Fantasy Griddle first podcast, QB rankings based on the Fantasy Pros average draft position. Next guy up is the 9th ranked quarterback, a guy that I love, Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy Garoppolo traded away from the Patriots last season for a bag of balls. He went on to become the 6th ranked quarterback from week 13 on. So as the full-time starter, he was the QB 6 last year. They add Jerick McKinnon to that backfield, who is an absolute freak of an athlete, a combine monster. You give Jimmy Garoppolo another offseason to learn that playbook and work with Shanahan, he's going to be a beast this year. He's the QB 6 from last season. He's making millions and millions of dollars. He's dating porn stars. He's doing everything right. I have him in the number 9 spot in my rankings. Fantasy Pros has him number 9 in their rankings. Duncan, why shouldn't he be a top 9 quarterback?
Him playing with Shanahan is huge. He's definitely going to help that offense a lot. And I agree, McKinnon is a beast. My concern with him is just the small sample size. Like, he had a great end of the season last year, but how many games? Was it 6 games that you said? 5 games. So we're talking about a 5-game sample here where toward the end of the year, I mean, it's not always the best competition to the final weeks. Aside from McKinnon, who else does he have? He has Pierre Garçon, who I think if he's healthy and if he is still the same player he was a few years ago, he could be a very good player for him. I think Goodwin is actually a very underrated wide receiver. And aside from those guys and McKinnon, I mean, he doesn't really have anybody there. So I'm just not as high on him as some people are. I think he's a great quarterback. He's going to be awesome. But this year, I think he's going to fall short. And I'm not going to be taking him at this ADP.
Yeah, I mean, they've got a couple decent tight ends. I think George Kittle's going to make, another step in the right direction. Obviously, they were comfortable enough with him and Garrett Selleck to move on from Vance McDonald when they traded him last year to the Steelers. You mentioned Goodwin. I think Garçon is going to have a resurgence with Garoppolo and be very good. And a couple good running backs out of the backfield. Matt Breida, Jerick McKinnon that can do some things out of the backfield. So I also would imagine that they're going to be down in a lot of games and throwing in a lot of games. And based on what I've seen from Jimmy when he was a Patriot and his first few games with the 49ers, I would love to get him as a great value pick in those kind of round 8, 9, 10 range. I think he's going to be very strong this year.
Yeah, if he slips to the 8-9 range, 8 or 9th round, that might be an okay place to take him. But I think people are reaching on him and he's going earlier in some respects. But you never know. He could pan out. Yeah.
And speaking of quarterbacks that are being reached for, the next man up is Andrew Luck, who they have as the 10th overall quarterback. And this guy is just huge red flags for me. Obviously, we know what he is when he's healthy. The 4,700 yards, 40 touchdowns. He can run the ball a little bit. The problem with him is that he's not been healthy. And the injuries with him over the past few years have been pretty murky. There hasn't been a lot of information on it. It seems like he's going to come back and then he sits out the whole season. He's been, a top quarterback before. He has that quarterback one upside. He has the pedigree, being drafted where he was by the Colts, being the predecessor to Peyton Manning. He's done it before, but the question is can he do it again? Can that shoulder stay healthy? He is going to play, they said, a quarter in preseason this week, and I will be very interested to see how much he throws, if at all, and keeping a close eye on him in the preseason to see what we can expect from him going forward into the regular season.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be tuning into that as well and keeping a close eye on Luck. It is weird. It's like he's been hurt for over a year. How are you not better at this point? But, with all the healthcare they've got, but he's still not 100%. And for me, if people are reaching on him and if you're going to have to take him in the 7th round, he's not going to be on any of my teams this year. He has finished as a top 4 quarterback in 3 of the last 4 seasons, but I think he's also one of those players that burned me one year. I think I spent like a 1st round draft pick on him that one year that he wasn't a top 3 guy. So he burned me, and I refuse to pick him.
Yeah, once you get burned by one of these guys, it's tough to come back to them, the next year or the year after. They're going to re-earn their spot in your hierarchy. Somebody that's always been very high on my hierarchy, and probably one of my favorite quarterbacks of all time, is my 8th ranked quarterback, Fantasy Pros 11th ranked quarterback, Matthew Stafford. I have been a huge Matthew Stafford fan for years. One year I took him in the 1st round, which was a huge mistake. But he could be my favorite quarterback of all time. He does it year in, year out with minimal running game. And this year they finally got him a little bit of help in Kerryon Johnson and LeGarrette Blount. He has very good talent at wide receiver. Marvin Jones was amazing, especially at the beginning of last year. Golden Tate, year in, year out, is phenomenal. Kenny Golladay, who was a lot of people's, preseason pick to be a huge breakout last year, didn't quite pan out, but he's shown a lot of promise, and they still have Theo Riddick out of the backfield. I expect another very consistent season from Stafford of, ballpark 4,500 yards and another 25 to 30 touchdowns. He continues to make fewer and fewer mistakes, with interceptions decreasing almost seasonally. He had a career low of 10 each of the last 2 seasons. And the most surprising thing of all was that he had a significant throwing hand injury almost all of last year, the second half of last season. His fingers were all taped together. His hand was mangled, and he still had a very productive, very, good season despite the injuries, and really kind of gritted it out when a lot of other quarterbacks might have taken some time off. He was there, he was taking the punishment, and he was playing well.
Yeah, those are all great points. And I know you do love you some Matthew Stafford, but I actually had him on my squad last year, and he was just boring for me. Like you're right. He, like, the numbers are there at the end, but for me, what I think is going to be a huge jump for him this year is actually the offensive line. So Pro Football Focus has Detroit Lions line ranked as the 8th overall line this year. They spent a top draft pick drafting the top ranked college tackle in Rick Wagner. So according to these guys, he's the best player coming out of Arkansas to play center. And they've also got a number of other good quality offensive players. They jumped up in the rankings. Last year they were 19th. Now they're ranked at 11th. So they've got a great line. They're adding Kerryon Johnson, who you mentioned, and he has the chance, I think, to be actually a superstar. He's super athletic. He played a huge role for Auburn. He ran the Wildcat for them. He did everything. And I think you give him a great offensive line, and Matthew Stafford, along with their receiving core, which could be one of the best, if not, well, I wouldn't say it's the best, but it's definitely up there, top 3 with him, with Marvin Jones, Tate, and Golladay. And yeah, he's definitely a great pick, especially somebody who can get this late.
For sure. And we're talking about, elite weapons with Matthew Stafford. It does not get any more elite for weapons than it does for Ben Roethlisberger, Antonio Brown, Juju Smith-Schuster, Le'Veon Bell, obviously out of the backfield. I think Vance McDonald is going to surprise a lot of people at tight end. I think he was targeted like 17 times in their playoff loss to the Jaguars. He's very good, and he's going to be much better than what they've had at tight end the past few years. And I think Big Ben has done pretty well with tight ends in the past with Heath Miller and a few other guys. So you could do a lot worse than Big Ben in the late rounds. Every guy we're going to mention from here on out is a 100 plus pick in the ADP. So Ben Roethlisberger 103, and every guy after that is going to be a little bit further down the line. But I think Ben is a very safe pick. I don't think he has nearly as much potential as the guys we've spoken about up until now, but I think he has a very high floor. Tough to not be successful with the best wide receiver in football on your team, and arguably a top 15 wide receiver in Juju Smith-Schuster, who was super impressive last year. They lose Martavis Bryant, but this guy has more than passed over anything he could do anyway. When you look at the numbers for Big Ben, I think 4,000 yards and 25 to 30 touchdowns are very realistic targets for him.
Yeah, Roethlisberger is perennially a great quarterback, and for some reason, I thought he had been hurt all these years, and he somehow hasn't missed any games recently. So he's actually been fairly durable quarterback the last few years. One thing I actually, this is a kind of a funny thing that I look at this time of year, but I look at NFL prop bets on betting websites to see kind of what they're putting as where they're ranking players for things like most touchdowns for the season, most yards for the season. Right now, Vegas has him on even odds for most touchdowns with Drew Brees. So Brees is a little bit further up the rankings here, and you're right. He's got Antonio Brown, he's got Le'Veon Bell, Juju Smith-Schuster, and he's always going to throw for yards. Let's see. For yards, he's plus 1,000 here to lead the league in yards, which is on par with Aaron Rodgers. So he's a great, who knows? I mean, Vegas obviously knows something, right? So I look at that stuff, and I think he's a great value pick as well.
For sure. And that'll get us into, we're going to take a little bit of a break, and then we're going to get into our bottom four of the top 16, which includes Jared Goff, Patrick Mahomes, Matt Ryan, Phillip Rivers. And then after that, we'll give you guys a couple sleepers that weren't in the top 16, but that, have a lot of potential for this upcoming season.
In his first game of 2017, Goff threw for more yards and had a better completion percentage than in any game from his rookie year.
Hey, now we're awake. Now we're awake. Now we're awake. Now we roll. Hey, now we roll. Now we roll.
He kind of let people know, hey, I've got potential to be a great quarterback in this league.
You get too deep, right? Off the turn of the mic, these seams bending in there are going to be dreams.
In head coach Sean McVay's new offense, Goff transformed the Rams into the highest scoring team in the NFL.
Okay, we're back. Going to get into Jared Goff now. Jared Goff ranked 13th on Fantasy Pros. I have him 15th. Has any quarterback in recent memory changed their public perception in one season more than this guy? I was sure he was going to be a bust. Totally, year two was amazing. Touchdown to interception ratio went from 5-7 to 28-7. So increased the touchdowns by 23, kept the interceptions at the exact same number. That's incredible. QB rating rose 40 points season over season. He has good weapons. They add Brandon Cooks. They have Robert Woods for another year. They have Cooper Kupp again, who was very good last year. Cooks and Gurley and these other weapons are too good to not keep Goff relevant, and to expect another jump in his productivity and in his production from year 2 to 3 should be expected. McVay seems to work very well with him, and I think he'll be, a very good streaming quarterback, back end QB1 for some people. I don't love him as a season-long quarterback, but I think he'll have very strong weeks depending on the matchup, and I could see using him, regularly throughout the season.
He's an interesting case because he last year had a stretch from about weeks 10 to 14 or so where he was on fire. And he does have the weapons around him. I think the addition of Cooks is huge. They've also got, Todd Gurley there, and I think it is a reasonable idea for him to take a natural progression and to take a step forward, because last year he ended up as the number 12th rated quarterback. So these guys have him as 13. Personally, I think he's going to be taking a step forward. I have him ranked as number 9, and I think he's a great value. He is more of a streaming guy, and in some respects, like if he has a bad matchup, he's not matchup proof. So a good value, but don't count on him to be a plug and play quarterback.
Okay. Another guy that you can get for potentially great value is Matt Ryan. The guy has been absolutely infuriating to own in the past. I've had him before. He is, he has a good matchup and he lays an egg, and then he has a horrible matchup and he performs really well. 2 years ago, MVP. Last year, awful. I think the pressure is really going to be off from him, not coming off the biggest collapse in Super Bowl history. I think he can get back to, just playing football and playing well without all the pressure of, just coming off, a historic loss. They've given Julio more money. He appears to be happy, and he's at camp. And we've seen what Ryan and Julio can do together. I don't expect a duplication of the 5,000 yards and 38 touchdowns from the MVP season, but I also don't expect him to be nearly as bad as he was last season. So I think if you can get Matt Ryan late, he's another guy that I think can have a very good season. He just doesn't do it year in and year out, and I'm not comfortable, taking him as my season-long quarterback. Maybe what you do is what I did in his MVP season. You see how those first few games go, and when he's kind of set a pace for himself for doing well, and you can see that he's performing well, and that whole offense is kind of operating well, then you get him. But I would not draft him.
See, I'm on board for drafting him. I mean, he's got his ADP is 107, so that's the 9th round, end of the 10th round. And we're talking about a guy, like you said, 2 years ago, he was the MVP and he threw upwards of 40 touchdowns. And I think people are forgetting that because he did have such a bad season last year. But he's year 2 with Steve Sarkisian. They added Calvin Ridley, who was some say the number 1 or number 2 overall receiver from the draft. You pair him with Julio, and then you got Devonta Freeman, Tevin Coleman. I see him as being a huge value, and he's a guy who could easily be a top 5 quarterback again. And you don't even have to risk anything to get him. You can get him in the 10th round, and he's a guy who potentially could, be what he was 2 years ago and be a potential MVP. I see him as a huge value. So the other thing that you got to think about too is they have a great offensive line there. They're ranked as the number 3rd overall offensive line according to Pro Football Focus. So that's just another plus and a reason to draft Matt Ryan this year.
Yeah, I think I would feel a little bit more comfortable with Matt Ryan than I would this next guy. Reports out of practice are that he has been absolutely terrible, calling the wrong plays, throwing tons of interceptions. He's, essentially a rookie quarterback. Patrick Mahomes, he's going to be taking over in Kansas City for Alex Smith. And Alex Smith had a great year last year, so I don't know that this offense is going to take a step forward or not. Pat Mahomes, an incredible athlete, first-round pick last year. He has great weapons in Sammy Watkins, if he's healthy, which he appears to be, Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, obviously Kareem Hunt out of the backfield. He did get the start in Week 17 last year, and he went 22 for 35 with 284 yards. So it wasn't, the greatest performance ever, but he was definitely competent. They do have a weak defense as well, so they could be in a lot of shootouts. And with those weapons, I think he can definitely be a compiler and have strong numbers some weeks. But I really have to see him do it the first few weeks before I have any trust in him. Reports out of camp have not been great. It is early, but I'm just not I've never been a huge guy in rookie quarterbacks or second-year quarterbacks. And until I can see them get it done, I don't trust them in my starting lineup.
I agree. And for that reason, I'm actually downgrading the entire Kansas City offense aside from Kareem Hunt. He does have a pretty good strength of schedule here, and number 7th overall, 7th easiest of quarterbacks. But like you said, he's essentially a rookie. He's had a few games, and I think they were crazy to let Alex Smith go. The guy was playing like an MVP last year, and you got Mahomes here, who people are raving about him. They think he's the next, Johnny Unitas. But I'm going to wait to see it. And personally, for me, that's going to downgrade Tyreek Hill, and we'll talk about that more when we get into wide receivers.
For sure. Rounding out the top 16 here, a perennially underrated quarterback, Phillip Rivers. For some reason, he's never that highly touted. He's kind of a forgotten man every year. But every year he always manages to put up numbers and find himself right around the top 10 quarterbacks, if not higher. Another guy like Wilson, super durable, plays every single game, very consistent, always has 4,500 yards and right around 30 touchdowns. Loses Hunter Henry, but I really think that they're going to be throwing a lot, and I have a lot of faith in Keenan Allen taking that next step and being an elite wide receiver. The Chargers always seem to play in close games and always try to find ways to lose games and keep it competitive. And it feels like it feels like Rivers is always on the field to end games, whether it's throwing an interception or throwing a touchdown. He's always in the game and always throwing. He's an ideal quarterback to grab late in drafts and is a superb streaming option against those weak defenses and in shootouts. They let him throw nonstop, and he always puts up the numbers.
Yeah, I agree. And when you have a guy like Rivers, who he's going to be in the top 12, I would say it's a pretty fair bet that he's going to be there. And you can take him this late. Why not? And especially when you can take another guy and play some matchups, I think it's a great idea and a great strategy for drafting a quarterback. Again, I go back to strength of schedule. You're going to learn more about this as the season progresses, so it's not exactly the most, you take it with a grain of salt, but he does have the third easiest of all quarterbacks, and that's including the first 5 weeks. He's got the second easiest. So he could easily come out and have a really hot start, and if the schedule doesn't let up, and if he continues to throw and stays healthy, he's a great quarterback to have on your team for sure.
So that rounds out the top 16. There are a couple other guys that I'd like to mention, and if you want to mention them at the same time or give me a couple guys that you feel can be sleepers or that you find to be great value, definitely want to hear those as well. But my first guy is Derek Carr, and we posted something on fantasygirl.com yesterday, a video of him at John Gruden's quarterback camp a few years ago, and I thought this was a very interesting interview. I honestly didn't even know it existed until a couple of days ago, but very rarely do you get to see a head coach handpick his quarterback when the head coach wasn't coaching the team. So he knows exactly what Derek Carr is. He's known him for years. He said that he could be the first overall pick in his draft when he came out 4 years ago. There's a good trio of wide receivers in Oakland and Amari Cooper, Jordy Nelson, Martavis Bryant. Carr has yet to put together a 4,000-yard season in his 4 years in the league, but this is his best chance to do it. John Gruden knew the quarterback situation when he took the job. There's no backup plan behind Derek Carr. It's his job. I think they have EJ Manuel behind him, who's no threat at all. Let's see what Gruden can get out of him. He's not going to cost you a high round draft pick. Gruden absolutely drooled over him at the quarterback camp in 2014, and I think he can have a good year.
Yeah, and he's another guy that was touted last year as a sleeper pick, and people were jumping all over Carr this year, kind of like everyone's jumping over Garoppolo. And now everyone's forgetting about him. But I agree. I think he could take a big step forward. Gruden is known for being excellent coaching quarterbacks, and he's got his man now. They put some weapons around him. He's got Jordy Nelson there, and Jordy's not that far removed from being one of the best receivers in the league. So I think it's a great situation for Carr. I think he's an excellent target late in drafts, and personally, that's what I'm going to be doing in drafts, is waiting to take a quarterback. I mean, it's obviously hard to pass those other guys we mentioned, like earlier, Tom Brady in the 5th, but if you can get Derek Carr in the 10th or 12th or something, that's a great pick. One guy I want to throw out there and see what you think about this is Alex Smith. He's in Washington this year, and we're talking about a guy last year who was playing at MVP levels for most of the season with really not, I mean, he had Tyreek Hill and he had Kareem Hunt, but he's just so efficient. and he's going to a new team, a new system, doesn't have a ton of weapons around him. But I think at this point of his career, he's a very, very good quarterback and someone that people are forgetting about. What do you think about Smith this year?
I think we know what Alex Smith is. Is he a special talent? No, not really. Is he a capable, game manager type that can have several big games throughout the season? Yes, definitely. He played very well in Kansas City last year. He threw his first 4,000-yard season and had a career-high 26 touchdowns. And, people forget that he can actually run a little bit too. He's very fast. I think there's definitely streamer appeal with Alex Smith. I wouldn't want him as my every week quarterback, but if you're one of those people that wants to stream quarterbacks throughout the year, he's definitely somebody that can perform well for you. That's for sure.
One more thing on him. If you do decide to go to the route of streaming quarterbacks, he is an awesome guy to pair with somebody else and play matchups. Because like you said, he's very efficient. Did throw 4,000 yards last year. I mean, that was the number 4 overall quarterback. He finished ahead of guys like Kirk Cousins, Stafford, Rivers. He's a good quarterback. So as a streamer, for sure.
Absolutely. And going along with the streamers, the last guy that I have that I want to talk about is a guy that'll be outside of a lot of people's top 20s. He's just inside mine. Tyrod Taylor. Obviously, the Browns took Baker Mayfield number 1 overall, so he is lurking there. But for now, the job is Tyrod Taylor's. I feel like he's always been very good and very productive and very unfairly criticized in Buffalo. He has a lot of talent around him. Jarvis Landry is catching everything in practice and has been very productive for the Dolphins. Corey Coleman is back. Josh Gordon is up in the air, but if he's back and his head's on straight and he's playing well like he does when he is on the field, I don't see how Tyrod Taylor can't have a career year with these weapons.
Yeah, it's not a bad take there. I like Taylor. I've always liked Taylor, and he's super efficient, doesn't turn the ball over. He's going to chip in a bunch of yards on the ground. My concern is how long are they really going to keep him on the field with Baker Mayfield, number 1 overall pick there. I don't see Taylor playing more than 6 games personally. So if you want to have a guy who can give you some points towards the beginning of the year, I'm all for it. But I'm not counting on him to be producing throughout the entire season with Mayfield in the background.
Gotcha. Good stuff. Well, that's going to do it for us. That was, again, our first episode of the Fantasy Griddle podcast. Again, my name is Mike Potashnik, and my co-host here is Duncan Murphy. Please, again, check us out on fantasygriddle.com for season-long fantasy analysis, rankings, and more. We're going to continue the rankings before the season and then have weekly rankings once the season begins. And also follow us and shoot us your questions on Twitter at Fantasy Griddle on Twitter. Duncan, always a pleasure. We'll be back later this week with running back rankings, and then hopefully by the end of the week, some wide receiver rankings for you guys.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. See you next week.